Welcome back to the final part of the afternoon. I do hope that there's been a lot of buzziness between the three sessions. There's a lot of intense listening, so I hope you've all come away feeling you've learnt something from this afternoon. I'm really delighted to introduce now our guest note speaker and our final speaker of the day, Dr. Ros Lynch. And I'm even more delighted to be welcoming her, having heard about her journey to get here, which was quite horrendous. She got stuck in Brussels yesterday, but she has gone via Bristol and goodness knows where else, just to be here in time to speak to you this afternoon. So without further ado, you've got Ros's biography. She has become a friend of the creative industries through her work with Richard Hooper on the Hub. And we are really pleased that she is in the post that she is now in. And you know, she is someone we can really talk to. Whether we are able to agree on everything is always another question. But it's really good to have Ros in place. So without further ado, over to you, Ros. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. As Sarah said, I was really panicking about the fact that I may have to send Sarah an email saying, I don't know how I'm going to get here, I can't get here, but the office managed to work miracles and get me in a very roundabout way back here this afternoon. So thanks for the opportunity to speak. The last time I attended one of these meetings, I was part of a double act, and Sarah mentioned a bit about it earlier. And that act was known affectionately as Batman and Robin. For those of you that don't know, I was in the lead and Richard Hooper was in the supporting role. I'm pleased, though, that Richard has come out from beneath my shadow and he is now making waves on his own. Congratulations to Richard and the team on winning the Stationers Company Innovation Excellence Award. I think you've done really well since I've left you, so I'm very pleased for you. As many of you know, I joined the IPO last February. And I've said this to one or two people. I was rather hoping that it would finish off the few things that were ongoing and just have a bit of quiet time to reflect on where next and what we needed to do next. It didn't work out that way. I've had one of the most challenging but in many ways stimulating years of my civil service career to date. I've had a fantastic opportunity to engage with you and with others in the creative industries and to learn far more about what matters to you. And that was hugely important for me going into the role because I knew I got a sense of what things had been like before. So my first priority was actually to build bridges and to try to understand where you were coming from a bit more. But I've also had the opportunity to see through some important work to the UK copyright framework, which was aimed at making it more relevant to the digital age. I suspect some people in this room still carry the scars of that experience, so I will not dwell on that. And I'm sure, like me, you were hoping for a bit of peace and quiet. But as you know, there's more to come, and I'm sorry I can't say to you that we can now relax, take a deep breath, relax, and just forget all about it. But I'll come back to that a bit later. What I want to do today is to just reflect a little on what's happened over the last year, and to then point to what is coming and what I hope we will be able to do together. Since this time last year, you will be aware we concluded the package of UK copyright reforms. I was going, anyway, I will say, following the Hargreaves review, I wasn't sure if I should use that word here, but I've mentioned it. It's out there. I suspect for many of you in the room, one of the biggest challenges was the exceptions package. which included the amendments to the education exceptions, but also the introduction of the text and data mining exception. I know in particular this last one was one that wasn't supported by a number of publishers, and so for me one of the things that I'm really keen to understand from you is, how is it working for you? If there are issues, then please do let me know. And as we are talking about exceptions, I might as well deal with a particular issue now, and that's the issue of private copying and the exception we brought in. I'm sure that you would all have heard the news by now that this was subject to a judicial review by the music industry, and unfortunately the judge has ruled against the government on one of the 5 substantive issues in this case. We're understandably disappointed and obviously are considering the implications of this ruling, but I hope you will forgive me if I don't want to discuss it any further, because the legal proceedings are still ongoing and therefore I'm not at liberty to talk about what happens next, etc. Other changes which you will be aware of, one of the key ones was the launch of the Often Works licensing scheme back on the 29th of October. So far we've had over 30 applications covering 270 individual copyright works. We've issued 21 licenses so far for a range of works including novels, paintings, poems, photographs and some music. And these have covered both commercial and non-commercial purposes. The scheme is still, or is currently in beta, and the team is using any feedback we can get to make improvements to the system as we go along. So we're not going to stop and do a big bang changeover. So for example, one of the things that we've done recently is to adjust elements of the application process to make it much more user-friendly than it was at launch. We've committed to reviewing the scheme after 12 months operation, so we are currently looking at our options for this. And again, if there's any feedback that you want to give us, any things that you particularly think that we ought to consider in this review, then please let me know. I think one of the most exciting things that have come alongside the legislative change, and one of the things which I think probably has more opportunities or a much bigger positive scope for disrupting the way licensing was done before, was is the Copyright Hub. Sorry. I really want to say thank you very much to you, the publishing industry, for the role that you have played in getting the hub to where it is and the role that you continue to play. I know Sarah worked tirelessly for a number of years trying to raise funding to get the hub to its current stage. I understand very clearly, because Richard does not let me forget, that for the hub to move forward, it really does need a much bigger injection of funding, and some of you will know that Richard and his team has made, they've made a request to government. I cannot say here what that request is or how we will respond to that request, except to say that we are considering it across Whitehall, and I think in due course, we will say what we can. But I want to make it very clear that the government really does support both the concept and the vision of the Copyright Hub, and we have no desire whatsoever to see it fail. However, I do not control the budget, so I cannot make any promises here about any funding. As you know, and you can see from the title, the other half of my responsibility is enforcement. So I just want to say a little bit about that. It's been said that there's no value in a right that cannot be enforced. And this government made its stance on IP enforcement clear in its manifesto promise to tackle online infringement. What we're trying to do through the work is to deny criminals access to the online marketplace and to cut off this source of funding. The recent injunctions on ISPs to block access to websites hosting ebooks demonstrates the shared approach from government and the creative industries. Education is has a key role to play, and the IPO has a number of business outreach and other educational initiatives to ensure that the public is aware of what they can and can't do with copyright works. we recognise there is a need for a mixture of both carrot and stick, and that's one of the reasons why we've also agreed to support the educational campaign of Creative Content UK, which will commence later this year. We're continuing our work with search engines. Our Minister has chaired a number of roundtables which have been aimed at ensuring that infringing material does not appear on the first page of search results. And we've done some analysis and we have seen some changes to that. And we're also trying to work with them to improve autocomplete functions so that they don't take unsuspecting customers to illegal websites automatically. We're also working with advertisers because we want to ensure that these illegal sites do not have funding coming through that route. So there is, quite a bit that we're doing. We recently published a report into the 8-year discrepancy between maximum prison sentence for online and physical copyright infringement, and we are looking at how we can equalize that, and we will be launching a consultation as soon as we possibly can on that issue. We're not an enforcement body. The IPO does not have enforcement powers, so a lot of what we do it's based largely on partnership working, it's on support, it's on coordination. There is some funding in there. I mentioned the educational element of Creative Content UK, but as you know, we also fund the Police Intellectual Property Crime Unit, and we've given them funding for another 2 years, taking it to 2017, and one of the things that I will be doing over the course of this year is actually trying to see how we can get that onto a more sustainable footing so that it's not constant every 2 years or so we have to look for more money. Some of you will know we've got a network of IP attachés working in other countries, particularly in areas where we think that is absolutely necessary. And we will continue over the next year to support try to support and safeguard the investment that you and others are making into the creative industries. What's absolutely clear is that without a joined-up effort, we will never make a significant impact on IP infringement. We need you, publishers, authors, agents, etc., everyone to work with us in government and in law enforcement to send a strong message to those who seek to profit from your work. I should also mention just briefly here that one of the things that we are going to be doing this autumn is publishing our enforcement strategy for the next 5 years. So we're thinking through what do we need to do to actually make sure that we tackle the problem working with others, and we're going to try to set out our long-term goals sometime later this year. Looking to the future, one of the things that we have to do by April 2016 is we have to transpose the Collective Rights Management Directive. We consulted earlier this year, and we're going to continue to work with PLS and with CLA, who we've been working quite closely with on the transposition process. We will be publishing our response to the consultation as soon as we can. For those that don't know, this directive is designed to promote high standards of governance and transparency in collecting societies across the whole of the EU. We see that as good news for rights holders who will benefit from more freedom and more protection when they manage their rights. It's also good news for collecting societies in the UK. Since the introduction of the Codes of Practice in 2012, we have been pleased to see collecting societies taking important steps to improve the way they do business. Creating a level playing field across the EU will showcase the good practice that exists in the UK and could lead to new opportunities for our collecting societies. To do this, we will be drawing on a wealth of experience, both from the recent reforms we've had, but we will be looking to stakeholders like yourselves to help us make the UK regime the best in the world for rights holders and users alike. We are looked on by other countries hoping to undertake similar reviews of their national systems, and we're doing what we can to promote the successes, the UK successes at WIPO and as we move towards European reform. And since we're on European reform, I mentioned earlier that there's more to come in the field, in the area of copyright and enforcement. And many of you will know that the Commission published its strategy for the digital single market in early May this year. This document sets out a package of measures, including reform to the EU copyright framework. We're expecting to see that legislation in December of this year, possibly. It will be as close to the end of the year, I think, as they could manage it. But obviously, I'm not going to put money on that, because anything near to Christmas always has a habit of being missed. The Commission's proposals include measures to enable portability of content and cross-border sales, as well as harmonization of certain exceptions. The package will also include measures to modernize IP enforcement, especially around commercial scale infringement. I appreciate that for some people in this room, the view is definitely still one of nothing needs fixing, or that, you know, I've also heard this is a solution looking for a problem, etc. I think the fact is that in some cases what the Commission wants to achieve is reasonable. I'm not saying it's so for everywhere. You know, I think very few people can argue that if you buy a subscription to something, you would like to be able to access the thing that, you know, the content that you've bought if you were away for a couple of weeks. I think that, you know, that is something fairly reasonable that we should all think will be a good thing. I am not saying that we fully support everything in the package. In principle, the government supports the digital single market. We don't know the detail. We don't know how all these things will be achieved. We are waiting for that finer detail as well to make a decision there. But I think there are things that there are things that we should be able to support. There are things where we will have to take a look at it. We've said very clearly that we would like to see very narrowly focused changes. We don't think it's necessary to completely reopen everything. We would like to make sure that those changes are evidence-based, and we are anxiously also looking for the evidence that the Commission brings forward. What I want to say, though, the key message or the key takeaway is that this package is coming forward this year. As Sarah said, I've just come back from Brussels. I've been there since Monday talking to various people in the Commission, different DGs, and you know, it is going to happen. And we are trying very hard, and that was the reason for my visit. We're trying very hard to try to influence the direction of that package. Last week, I was speaking to the Germans and to the French. We were in meetings talking about, you know, trying to find what things are interesting in them, what things, you know, we would want to see, etc. So we're doing as much as we can as government to try to influence the direction, but we need your support in this. We really can't do it without you. I know that some of you are regular visitors to the Commission. I saw Richard earlier, I think, yes. I know Richard visits often. And you've been putting forward your views to officials and to commissioners, etc. And I firmly believe that there's a lot that the Commission can learn from the UK, and I know that they're very eager to learn from us as well. And we should continue to do, you know, to try to influence. So you're going out and speaking to commissioners, speaking to officials, absolutely do that. And I think there's a lot that we can do together to share our experience and ensure that the copyright package not only leads to forward-thinking, robust framework which drives economic growth, creates opportunities for our businesses and introduces greater choice for customers, but that it also ensures that our creative industries continue to make the valuable contribution that they do, and that creators are adequately rewarded for their work. I just want to leave you with the thought, and I know this might be unpleasant to some, that we're living in a world where things are changing. New technological developments are driving the emergence of new business models, and there are new demands by consumers. I think, you know, maybe 5 years ago the Copyright Hub would not really have been on anyone's radar, but it is, and it's something that, you know, that has real value and something that the technology is enabling. And through the Hub and other new technologies, we will see more things happening. And because of that, we need a copyright and enforcement framework that can easily respond to change. And for me, that requires a mixture of responses. It's going to require you to do more in terms of making legal sources easily available. It's going to require more initiatives like the Copyright Hub. It's going to require things like what you're doing to enable people to do text and data mining, researchers to do text and data mining. And dare I say, it might require a bit of legislation. I'm not saying legislate everything, but I'm just saying that we're going to need to have a variety of things happening in the future. And for me personally, the more that we can actively shape these responses working with you, the better it will be for the publishing sector, for UK creativity, and for the economy. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ros. That was a very good overview of everything that's a huge amount of work that's going on and is in the pipeline coming forward. We do have some time for questions, and this is a great opportunity.
Easy ones.
Easy ones.
Remember, I had a really, really difficult journey there. Be gentle.
So, yes, we've already got, we have got a roving mic. If you could just wait for it and tell us your name, and it's over here, Pam. Tell us your name before you ask your question, please.
Good afternoon to you. My name's Gordon Owen. I'll give you the hardest question for the evening, just to make your day. But in serious, we can all help and support with our views, our experiences and our knowledge. But the key thing I think you said, Doctor, was the fact that it has to be evidence-based. And creating some sort of online platform where there's consistency with evidence coming through, where that can then be measured, might be a helpful way for the future.
Sorry, for us to create
to have something that where there's consistent data coming through that creates that evidence.
It'll be interesting to hear, a bit more of what you're thinking of.
In order for you to do things, as you said in your own speech, and as again, quite rightly so, around the knowledge and information in order to be able to shape the changes and the way we move along, and make sure that there is a model that's adaptable as well as effective. But within that, it does have to be evidence-based.
Yes,
I can come to you with all sorts of thoughts, but they are my thoughts. They're years of experience, but nonetheless, they are those things, and that might not be consistent with other people's experiences here or somewhere else in Europe.
Yeah.
But a platform by which I can provide the evidence as to why I think that that's that way, and others can consistently do that, can help you build a picture as the IPO, in order to be able to say, yeah, this is something, obviously there's a pattern, there's particular signs and symptoms on which he has to base that, rather than just you've got a mountain of things coming in, and how do you actually disseminate that and make some sort of informed judgment.
Okay. Well, we can certainly go away and think about it and look at it. I mean, we're limited, or we're very restricted at the moment because everything has to go to .gov.uk. So, we've had to rationalise all our online stuff. So, but, happy to go away and think about how we can make, I think generally what you're saying is finding a way to make it easier for people like yourselves to provide the evidence that we need to be able, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Richard Mollett from the Publishers Association. Thanks for those remarks, and thanks also for, as you said in your speech, for taking the time you have over the last, whatever it is, 16 months to get to better understand the industry. I know it's greatly appreciated by rights holders, not just here, but across the creative sector. I'm sorry to hear you had such a dreadful journey back from Europe. Is it the strongest argument for Brexit, perhaps? But on this point about the EU and evidence, could you, I know we've talked about this, but I think the important thing is to keep stressing to the Commission the importance of having good evidence, as you just said. And I think two things have happened in the last couple of weeks. One, a minor one, a great piece by Professor George Ford from the Phoenix Centre, who's written the most brilliant rebuttal of the Lisbon Council Economic Assessment I think I've ever read. And if anyone hasn't seen it, go onto the Register. Andrew Lofsky's written a brilliant piece about it. It demolishes the economic base for a lot of what the Commission is basing its assessment of, and our friend Ian Hargreaves is probably mentioned in there somewhere as well. So even when the Commission thinks it's got good evidence, it doesn't necessarily. And slightly more uncomfortably perhaps, but you weren't at the IPO at the time, but the private copying exception, which got knocked down, you know, the judge was very clear in his judgment. The reason it got knocked down is because the government based policy on shoddy evidence. And the UK music community was able to win at least this stage of the battle because the government wasn't able to show that its policy was based on good enough evidence. I think if there was anything the Commission could learn from the UK, it is from that judgment the other day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Are there any more questions? Yes, David Pugh.
Ros, you asked for easy questions. David Pugh, NLA Media Access. It seems you and David Cameron are on a parallel path going around Europe trying to influence people, as you suggested from your remarks. The press seems to think that our Prime Minister isn't getting very far, but in what ways are you trying to influence the debate, and do you think you're going to be any more successful?
When you say in what ways, are you meaning how we're engaging or what we're trying to achieve?
You said in your remarks that you've just come from Brussels, trying to influence the outcome. Are you able to share with us in what ways?
Well, it's more one. I think there are a couple of things we're trying to do. One is, as I said, the strategy is very high level. We still have no detail that sits underneath it. What we've been trying to do in conversations is try to tease out where officials, what sort of things they're thinking about, so that we can come away and do some analysis, do some searching, so that we can actually go back and say, well, we've thought about this and we can see these potential issues. Have you considered this? And what are you going to do about it? So it's kind of a bit of fact-finding, but it was also to say, well, you know, we have tried this, and this is the response. They've been very, very keen to ask us questions. You know, for example, we had quite a long discussion about the education exception working alongside licensing, because we want to make sure that, you know, they are also seeing how the two can work alongside each other. We talked about text and data mining, and having had an opportunity to do some work myself, I'm constantly saying, you know, so, but the evidence doesn't show X or the evidence shows Y, so how is your response going to deal with that? So it's trying, as I said, trying to get information on what they're thinking about, but also saying to them, this is what we know, this is what we think works. These are some of the issues that you really ought to be considering. And, you know, for us, we've got a public sector broadcasters, we've got BBC operating, you know, the way that they operate, Channel 4, etc. So we had a long conversation probably about 2.5 weeks ago with officials as well about how things work and how difficult it would be for some of our broadcasters if certain things were to happen. So it's kind of planting various things as much as we can plant them, and as I said, doing it with other member states as well.
Can I just ask you something, Ros? It's a very short timetable. You said we're expecting legislation by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So to get to the point of something on the statute books, there's a whole process before that.
Well, sorry, the bring forward legislative proposals.
Are the proposals.
The proposals, sorry.
Because I'm just wondering if where is there going to be some room for you to come back and talk to us and get our views, our evidence, you know.
I should have said what we're planning to do is once the proposals are out, we're going to hold a number of roundtables. I mean, we had 3 when the strategy came out in May, and some people here would have at least come to one of those. We are also going to do a formal consultation, so that we get your views in writing, and we will use, you know, bilateral meetings, whatever means possible to get as wide a cross-section of views as we can on the proposals that have been put on the table.
And do you think ahead of that there are any areas that we should be focusing on for gathering evidence in, perhaps?
One of the most difficult areas for us, and I mean, speaking to Richard before, and I may have got this wrong, I know that portability is not that much of an issue for the publishing sector. I'm not sure the extent to which access, and the access thing is about, at the moment, people being able to access stuff that's not available in their own countries. And that's the one that's particularly troublesome for the audiovisual sector, but I don't know the extent to which it is, if it isn't an issue for you. The exceptions that the Commission are considering harmonizing, so far they've only mentioned 3 areas to us. So there's the education research, there's text and data mining, and there is one about libraries and access to knowledge and stuff, which is that's all that they've said to us so far. And understanding within each of these things that they're bringing forward, what would be the key issues to you, what would be your red lines, where, you know, whatever evidence you can give us to show that things are actually, you are responding to X, Y, and Z, to various demands and stuff, and therefore this is something that actually there's a lot on the table already. I think the other thing I should have said, and I didn't pick up earlier on the enforcement package. Enforcement is meant to come at the end of 2016. There is going to be something put in the copyright package around intermediaries and liability around intermediaries, and I suspect that's probably an area that you're interested in. The Commission is going to do a consultation on it. They're now scoping that consultation and even just trying to help them think about what should be included in that consultation document, I think would be very useful. So helping us understand so that we can say to them, look, we think that this should be included. Have you considered putting in questions around this area? So as I said, we're kind of trying everything that we can, trying to go in at various avenues. We've got our minister, you know, going out and talking to MEPs and stuff as well. So we're trying to come at it from lots of different directions.
So it sounds like we've got our work cut out for us in preparing. There's a question at the back. Is there a microphone that we could...
David Reid, VSNR. I infer from the way you were rather skated around it that the IPO is going to be hit by government cutbacks. If so, would you be prepared to tell us how you're going to cope with it? I.e., for example, are you going to ditch some projects, or are you going to lengthen budget lines, or how?
I wasn't aware that we were going to be, you know, IPO itself is going to be hit by cutbacks. We haven't heard anything of the sort. We know across government departments have been asked to make huge cuts. We are self-financing. So in a sense, we don't rely on the Treasury to give us the money to exist. Obviously, as part of government, we will have to tighten our belt in areas, and we are looking at where there is opportunity to shave some costs, but that is not in the work that we have to do around developing policy. It's not in terms of our work on influencing in Europe. So I'm not expecting to have to make any particular cuts in the copyright and enforcement area, since these are 2 areas that are priority for government. And nobody's told me differently, so until they tell me, I'm working on that assumption that I'm okay.
That's reassuring.
It might just be worth, if I may.
Could you just wait for the microphone?
I've just made more of a case because one of the things many of you may already know, I mean, the parliament.gov is a worth place to see where the committee is meeting, what subjects are being discussed, what is being said, and there is a platform within that, as you're aware, in order for people to also be able to feed in. So when they do set that up, there is a mechanism within Parliament now, online. But look at me, lost.
This is within the parliamentary website.
So once it starts going in there,
yes.
So it is worth anyone that wants to find out what's being said or wants to feed in or what questions are being asked.
Yeah.
That is worth actually for all of us to bear in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any, I think we've got time for 2 more questions. There's one, Owen Meredith, and then we'll come to Adam.
Hi, Owen Meredith from the PPA. Was just on TDM, which you said is obviously one of the priorities. I think the key thing that seems to be missing in the Commission's strategy is to ensure that TDM is only on a non-commercial basis. So obviously the UK exception is on a non-commercial basis. What sort of soundings are you getting back on that, and is that something that's an oversight or an intentional omission? I
think it's intentional because they haven't decided yet. They're still considering the pros and cons of both. And I think that's the case with a lot of the package. I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying that, you know, the way that the Commission, the new Commission has been set up has created particular not necessarily problems, but interesting ways of how decisions will be made. So you've got Oettinger, you've got ANSIP, and the officials somewhere in there trying to make sense of what each of them want. And I think that's part of why there aren't any firmer details on the table, because this is still very, very much up in the air. You would have read speeches where they sometimes seem to be saying relatively similar things, and sometimes they seem quite far apart. So I think it's just really still very confusing. And on TDM, it's still all on the table, I think.
Adam had a question.
Sarah, thank you. After the inestimable Richard Hooper left Ofcom, I heard a line from an Ofcom executive which has subsequently made me doubt all evidence-based policy, because a line was uttered which would never have happened while Richard was there, which was, we can't accept that evidence because it goes against our policy narrative. So I've always been slightly worried about this. But what the question I have for you, what I'd like to hear is a bit about the vision thing, because we had quite a lot of the detail thing, for which I'm grateful. It gave a good overview. And you started your talk by saying how much you really wanted a period of repose to reflect. And I think that is such a sensible request, and I would suggest you should say to government, we need to stop. And the reason goes like this, is because, without going into the details of Hargreaves, whenever Hargreaves came across anything too difficult, and everything's been difficult in the technical transition, it was filed under too hard, let's have an exception. So one of the things, and it was filed too hard because there wasn't a countervailing model. Yesterday, a countervailing model was launched. Yesterday, the world's biggest, what will be the world's biggest rights organization was launched. Yesterday, Apple Music was launched. Apple Music is going out to 800 million people. Even if they only get, I don't know, 5% as starters at the end of 3 months, that is a very big, powerful thing. And the question I have is, because Ofcom was always a reactive body, always actually looking back. And I'm wondering, is the IPO a reactive body looking back, or will you be sending a team to Cupertino to see how a new digital rights organization should really be working?
Wow.
That's unfair.
The ideal was to have that reflection time. I think Europe put that to pay. If I took the time out to reflect, then we would have a package on the table agreed and stuff without us actually having any influence. And I think it's more important that we try to influence and shape the package that is to come, rather than trying to spend our time reflecting. So I think the idea that we can stop actually won't cut it, because it will move on and we would have lost out. And I have no idea where the Commission would end up. I mean, it could end up at somewhere that actually is much worse than it is the way things are now. So to your question about reflection, I would love to have it. But at the moment, the next 18 months, the focus has to be on the European reform and what comes out of that. We are going to reflect on enforcement, and I've said that that's one of the reasons why we're doing the strategy, because we're trying to think ahead, we're trying to look at what's, rather than just looking back, trying to look forward and think about what's coming, what we need to do differently, how we need to work with others to make sure that we can actually tackle the problem. And, you know, I can't say what will happen after when we do get an agreement across Europe. I probably won't be there in the IPO, and it will be somebody else wishing for a bit of reflection time, hopefully. And I don't, you know, I can't really say much more than that. I think it's an ideal, it would be lovely, but I don't think we can take the risks at the moment.
Well, on that note, I think I'd like to thank Ros for making such a supreme effort to be here, and for sharing very openly with us what is going on, what she's working on, and what's going on in the Commission. And to wish her good fortune with all of that. And we look forward to having a continuing dialogue, sharing our evidence with you, and helping you to influence things so that our world can continue to flourish and thrive. So thank you very much indeed, Ros, for coming along.
Thank you.
And that really does bring to an end the formal part of the day. Thank you all very much for bearing with us and sitting and listening to so many different people speaking. We do hope you found it informative and, as I said earlier, edifying, I hope. Please do join us. Stay with us for drinks, which are in the room directly behind, and we look forward to continuing the discussion over drinks. Thank you.